So language and identity. When we say ethnolinguistics, that is the study of language and identity. Ethno means people group, and of course, linguistics means the study of. So ethnolinguistics is the study of language and identity. You see, class, language is the primary marker of identity. It could be ethnicity, and it could even be social and economic status. You notice that there are celebrities, there are people who talk differently from other people. They have certain vocabulary, they have certain pronunciation, they have grammar structures that are different from other people. So that could be a mark of their identity or a mark of their social and economic status. So the Greeks identified non-Greeks as those speaking languages that sounded like bar to them and called them barbarians. Again, those who were not Greeks, they sounded to the Greeks like bar. And they called them barbarians, okay? So class for us Filipinos, the Chinese sound like chongqing, 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 chongqing. And I heard that to the Chinese, we Filipinos sound like kakakakakakaka, kakaka. That's how we sound to them. Okay. Now there's an incident in the book of Judges in Israel, in the land of Israel, in the land of the Jews. There was a civil war between the Ephraimites and the Gileadites. The Gileadites are a sub-tribe of Ephraim, but there was war between the Gileadites and the Ephraimites. Okay? And the Gileadites somehow were able to capture the fords of the Jordan leading to Ephraim. And whenever a survivor of Ephraim said, "Let me cross over," the men of Gilead asked him, "Are you an Ephraimite?" If he replied no, they said, "All right, say Shibboleth." If he said Sibboleth, because he could not pronounce the word correctly, they seized him and killed him at the fords of the Jordan. 42,000 Ephraimites were killed at that time. Imagine that. Pronunciation is an important marker of identity. Okay, so language, all parts of language, grammar, pronunciation, vocabulary, they all are a hallmarks of language. And a person belonging to a particular ethnic group is primarily identified by the language that he speaks. So a Filipino, it's hard to it's hard to identify a Filipino as being Filipino if that person could not speak any Filipino language. So it would be quite difficult to say that somebody is Bicolano if that person doesn't speak Bicol. It's difficult to say that somebody is Ilocano if that person cannot speak Ilocano. In fact, when I was in college, I had some Chinese friends, and they had a Chinese friend who was really Chinese, but that Chinese friend could not speak Chinese, Filipino Chinese. Okay, so my Filipino Chinese called that Chinese person, the Chinese student, fake Chinese, Peking in Czech. That's the term that they use, Peking in Czech, because he could not speak Filipino Chinese. So although he was biologically Chinese, Filipino Chinese, the fact that he could not speak Filipino Chinese showed that he was not as Chinese as other people would consider him to be. Now, there's this theory by Howard Giles. It's called accommodation theory. People adjust their speech depending on whether they want to identify or distinguish themselves from their interlocutors, from the people they're talking with. So if they want to identify their themselves with the people they're talking with, they would drop their ethnic markers, like their accent or whatever it is in their speech that would identify them as being distinguishable. Again, if a person wants to identify with the people he or she is speaking, there's a tendency for that person to drop his ethnic markers, including accent. Now, if a person would like to distinguish himself from other people, from the people he is talking to, then he would try to maximize, he would try to highlight his speech markers, including accent. Okay, so that's accommodation theory by Howard Giles. Now, there is this concept of language purism and prescriptivism. There are people who believe that their language should be kept pure. So, which means that they don't like borrowed words, they don't like changes in the language, including pronunciation and changes in meaning. Now, there's a tendency for those people to be prescriptivists. They would say, oh, this is the right way. Don't use who. You should use whom. Like, this is the person who I am talking to. They would correct you. They would say whom. This is the person whom I am talking to. And sometimes some people, in their attempt to be prescriptivists, they tend to try to highlight parts of the language that they would think would make the language sound more prestigious, including the use of similar markers as that of Latin. So, for example, normally in English you say, it is me. And now, such people would say, don't say it is me, you say it is I. You see, it is I sounds more like Latin because Latin can have two subjects. So when you say it is I, you have two subjects there, it and I. So language purism can lead to prescriptivism, but prescriptivism could also have different motives, including a desire to make a language sound more prestigious by making it more alike with another language, another prestigious language, just like I mentioned. Now, in 1755, Samuel Johnson published a dictionary of the English language, partly because he felt the English language was being corrupted. So he came up with a dictionary that prescribed the meaning and even pronunciation of certain words. However, in 1828, Noah Webster published an American dictionary of the English language. He dreamed that someday Americans would speak a version of English different from the British. So during that time, independence fever was high among Americans, and they wanted to be as distinct as possible from the British to assert their independence. And one way was to have a different language from that of the British. So you see, class, that language is a powerful way of conveying, of highlighting identity. Part of language identity is language prestige. There are people who are accorded a high status or a low status based on the language that they speak. So, for example, if like in the self-learning video, if a person speaks Spanish, that person is imputed or accorded a high status if that person can speak Spanish. Now, if that person can also speak French, also, there's also prestige involved in it. Now, if a person can speak English fluently and academically with high sounding words, or the way they talk they sound like native speakers, maybe British, maybe American, they would be accorded language prestige. The same thing in the Philippines. That's really the case in the Philippines. The same thing could be said about local languages. Those who could speak a particular language, they are accorded a higher status. Then there's the concept of language as heritage. For example, there are languages that are already about to die, like Gaelic in Ireland and Gallega in Scotland. So those languages are no longer used by most people, maybe only a few thousand. But they are accorded a high status, they are protected, they are given privileges because they are considered as heritage languages, like Gaelic. In Ireland, which was many hundreds of years ago, a place where Gaelic was spoken, only a few people, only a few thousand people out of the millions speak Gaelic. And yet, in Ireland, Gaelic is considered a heritage language and it's valued. Okay? The same thing in the Basque region of Spain. In the Basque region of Spain, they have the Icastola school system in which their Basque language is maintained and identified as part of their heritage. You see, the Basque region wants to separate from Spain. Many people from the Basque region want to separate from Spain. And so part of that desired separation is to maintain the Basque language as being a heritage language. Then there's this idea of language standardization. People think that by standardizing language, there is a focal point of unity. There's mutual understanding when you have language standardization. They think that it would provide a lot of benefits. Although in my opinion, language standardization is okay as long as it doesn't infringe on specific people groups or specific dialects. For example, if you want to standardize Tagalog, and by doing so you suppress a particular dialect of Tagalog, then I don't agree with that. If you force people to behave linguistically this way, if you try to remove their diversity, I am more for diversity, not so much on language standardization. So one of the units in the Philippines trying to create a standard orthography throughout the Philippines is the KWF. And I disagree with that. I really disagree with the standard orthography that is difficult for people to use. In my opinion, orthography should benefit people. It should make ease of use, readability, the primary consideration. Readability and writing ability. Okay, it's easy to read, it's easy to write, which I believe KWF is not doing. Okay, now there are ways to strengthen language identity. Language identity can be strengthened when those who speak the same language have thick relationships. What do you mean by thick relationships? When one person is related to another person in more than one way. So, for example, uh, you have a neighbor, and that's just one relationship. But if you have a neighbor who is also your church mate, then you have two relations. You're both a neighbor and you are also church mates. Okay? Or maybe you're also Zumba mates. So you already have three relationships. So that makes for a thick relationship. Now, if people who speak the same languages, if people who speak the same language have thick relationships, that strengthens language identity. Also, when you have multiplex relationships, that also strengthens language identity. What is a multiplex relationship? What are multiplex relationships? When people who are related to you are also related to each other, that's a multiplex relationship. So, for example, you have a church mate and you also have a teacher. So, you have a teacher in your school and you have a church mate. And those two, your church mate and your teacher, they have a relationship. Maybe they are both members of the same Zumba class, or maybe they belong to the same political party. So when people who are related to you are also related to each other, that's what we call multiplex relationship. And when people who are related to you also relate to each other and they speak the same language, that strengthens language identity. So two ways, thick relationships and multiplex relationships. Those are ways of strengthening language identity. Now, identity can also be expressed and reinforced through signs, both verbal and nonverbal. So, for example, there's a restroom that says male, and there's a restroom that says female, and you go to that restroom. That strengthens your identity. Or you go to a PWD toilet, that strengthens your identity. Now, if it's related to language, then it strengthens language identity. So, for example, you are a member of this particular section, to Magalang. This is an old example back when my daughter was still in second grade. So by going to a section identified as Tumagalang, that strengthens your language identity. A language can strengthen your identity. Okay, when you go to a particular sign, when you go to a particular place based on the language sign, that strengthens your identity related to language. Now, identity can also be imputed or ascribed through speech acts. Again, in its barest form, in its purest form, in my opinion, a speech act is an act done by saying it. Again, a speech act is an act done by saying it. So when an authorized person says, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," when that person says, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," he imputes an identity between the two people through language. By saying it, he makes them husband and wife. On the right side, you see a picture. This is a christening of a boat. So the long elongated thing there is the rudder, and you have champagne, and the champagne is broken in the rudder, and that's christening a boat. So when you say to the boat, "I name this boat the Arkham," then you are doing a speech act, and you identify the boat as Arkham. So you give the boat the name by saying it. Now you cannot name a boat by just thinking about it. In your thoughts, for example, you say, I named this boat the Arkham. Now other people don't hear you, so they don't see that identity. Maybe for you, you call it Arkham, but other people don't. So you need to speak it out loud. Okay, so identity can be imputed through speech acts. Now, identity can also be expressed and reinforced through language-based activities. So when you sing the national anthem, or you recite the Pledge of Allegiance, or you recite the Pamatang Makabayan, by doing so, you express and you reinforce your identity. Okay? So that's for Filipinos and for other nationalities. Maybe for Roman Catholics, when they recite the Apostles' Creed, then they identify themselves as belonging to that particular religious group. Okay, I think for the El Shaddai group of Mike Velarde, one of the ways they express and reinforce their identity as belonging to that people group, to that religious group, is by reciting Psalm 91. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Of course, that's in Tagalog. When they do that, they identify themselves as that particular group. Okay. In fact, in some churches, they don't want to sing a particular song because they identify it with a particular religious group. Okay. In fact, in our church, uh, there was this song during giving, tayo'y magbigay, the best ang ialay, may ngiti sa labi, awit ng papuri, tayo'y magtanim upang nang tayo'y mayroong aanihin. And then the chorus goes, babalik sa'yo ang iyong ibinigay ng siksik, liglig at umaapaw, something like that. It's after, I'm sure I'm out of tune, okay? But later on, the leaders decided we will not sing that song anymore because that's identified with Mike Velarde's um, people group, religious group. So we changed it to a song by Don Noel. Just thank you, Lord, during offering times. Okay, so identity can be expressed and reinforced through language-based activities, including songs, reciting specific prayers, reciting frozen speech. Frozen meaning you don't change the wording. Okay. So class, that is language and identity. Language is the primary marker of identity, and identity can be expressed and reinforced through language and language-based activity.